She drank it already, so stop acting like you matter here. Her voice cut through the chatter of the neighborhood social, the words aimed straight at my pregnant wife, and the smirk aimed at me. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just stared at the cup she'd handed over, the same cup my wife had taken a sip from before her hand began trembling. When she suddenly collapsed against me, the HOA president didn't flinch. She actually stepped back like Claire was an inconvenience on the floor. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. People rushed, panicked, but I didn't. There was something wrong, deeply wrong, and I recognized it in an instant. Something in the way her eyes darted, the way she wouldn't look at the drink again, the way her fingers kept rubbing the same spot on her wrist. The truth was sitting right there in her false smile, and she had no idea I could see it. This wasn't about a neighborhood rule. This was about intent. Before I tell you the exact second the ER doctor whispered what they found in my wife's blood, you need to know why everything in me went cold the moment she fell. The moment I lifted Claire into my arms, the world narrowed to the weight of her body and the faint sound of her struggling to breathe. Nothing else mattered. Not the gasps around us, not the circling neighbors, not even the HOA president standing frozen with her hands clasped like she was the victim here. I didn't bother asking her anything. She'd already told me everything with that one sentence. I carried Claire straight to the car. My voice stayed steady as I told someone to call ahead to the hospital. They kept asking what happened, but I didn't answer. I was already replaying the last 5 minutes in my head, the refill she insisted on doing herself, the way she rushed it back, the smear on the rim of the cup that hadn't been there before. I knew what tampering looked like. I knew what fear disguised as arrogance sounded like. And I knew this wasn't an accident. At the ER, they took her from me. The nurse asked what she drank, and I handed over the cup without hesitation. "Run it," I said quietly. She looked surprised. Most husbands cry, panic, or collapse. I didn't. My calm scared her more than any shouting ever could. While Claire lay in the treatment room, I stood in the hallway, hands clasped behind my back. Anyone else might have thought I was praying. I wasn't. I was remembering the briefings, the chemical signatures, the cases where symptoms appeared exactly like this: stomach tightening, dizziness, sudden collapse. I hadn't touched those files in years, but the knowledge flooded back like it had been waiting. When the doctor finally came out, he didn't need to speak. His eyes said enough, and my chest tightened. "We found traces of a drug," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "She didn't ingest it by accident." He didn't have to tell me. Which drug? It was the one possibility I feared most, the one designed to end pregnancies quietly, the one that had been illegal to administer without explicit medical instruction. Something inside me went very still. When they let me see her, she was pale, shivering slightly under the hospital blanket. I sat beside her, brushing a thumb over her knuckles. "You're okay," I murmured. "I've got you." She tried to speak, but I shook my head gently. "Rest. I'll handle this." And I would. Even if every bone in my body remembered losing my first child. Even if this opened wounds I'd tried for years to bury. I wasn't the man I used to be, but I hadn't forgotten what I learned. When the nurse stepped out, I walked back to the reception desk. The cup they'd taken came back into view, sealed now, tagged for toxicology. I stared at it, feeling my pulse steady. Someone did this. Someone intentional. Someone who thought a maintenance tech wouldn't notice. They had no idea who I used to be. On my way out of the hospital to breathe for a moment, a breeze carried the faint echo of that HOA president's smug voice. The memory stung, but I welcomed it. Anger clarified things. Anger revealed patterns. As I looked down at my hands, still faintly trembling from carrying Claire, I understood something with a certainty I couldn't ignore. If I wanted the truth, I had to piece it together myself before anyone buried it. Hospitals would test her blood, but the scene back home, the drink station, the motions she made, the objects she touched, those were mine to track. I stepped into the parking lot with one thought burning through every memory and every instinct. This wasn't over, not even close, and tomorrow I'd return to that community. Quiet, observant, ready. Because beneath the uniform they overlooked, beneath the tired eyes and calm voice, lived a man who once uncovered poisonings in war zones, a man who could follow chemical trails invisible to others, a man who wasn't going to let someone steal another child from him. I turned back toward the hospital doors, drawing in a long breath. The night air was cold, But clarity lived inside it. She'd slipped something into that drink, and I was going to prove it. The hospital doors slid shut behind me as I stepped back inside, letting the warmth swallow the cold air I'd been breathing just seconds earlier. I wasn't done here. Not until I knew Claire was steady enough for me to leave her side without guilt pressing into my ribs. I walked back toward her room, keeping my steps quiet, steady, controlled, the way I used to move when precision mattered more than speed. She was asleep now, her breathing soft and even. Good. She needed rest for what was coming. I stood there for a long moment, letting the sight of her anchor me. Losing her wasn't an option. Losing the baby wasn't an option. Not this time. A nurse passed behind me, whispering something into a chart, and I let the faint sound drag my attention back to the present. The cup, the drink, the moment she lowered her voice and said my wife had already drunk it. That's where everything started. When Claire's vitals stabilized, I stepped into the hallway and made my way toward the exit again. I needed to move, to get back to Ridgewood Bluffs while the scene was still fresh. Evidence didn't last forever. Memory didn't either. And I wasn't going to let anything slip past me. As I walked, I replayed the social in my head, the setup, the tables, the path she walked. The HOA president wasn't subtle. People like her never were. They believed authority protected them. They believed their smiles were armor, but arrogance always left footprints. I got into the car and drove back to the gated community. The night guard barely glanced at me as I entered, raising the gate with an easy wave. No one here suspected anything. They thought Claire fainted from heat, or stress, or whatever rumor would be whispered first. That worked in my favor. When people weren't alarmed, they weren't watching. And when they weren't watching, I could move freely. The clubhouse was dark now, the social long over. I used my maintenance pass to let myself in. The smell of citrus cleaner lingered in the air, strong enough to suggest they'd scrubbed floors, but not surfaces. Cleaners rarely wipe down personal drinkware, unless told. Perfect. The lounge area still had chairs slightly shifted out of place. The drink table sat in the corner, cups stacked, napkins half folded. I scanned everything from a distance first, noting what had changed, what hadn't. Then I spotted it, the trash bin near the counter. I moved toward it slowly, kneeling down. When I lifted the lid, the faint scent of lemonade hit me and mixed in with it, something oddly chalky. I reached in with gloves from my maintenance pouch, picking through carefully. Most cups were generic, lightweight, disposable, but then I found it. Claire's cup. The mark on the rim was still there, faint but unmistakable. And beneath it, something even better. A small dried smear on the inside where powder had clumped before dissolving. Someone had been sloppy. Not with the act, she'd been confident, but with the execution. Sloppiness always betrayed intent. I placed the cup inside a clean evidence bag, sealing it tight. This was going straight to the detectives. But my search wasn't finished. I checked the counter, the table edges, even the small sink area behind the bar. And there it was. A mug, ceramic, floral print, out of place among the disposable cups. Not usually used during socials. I lifted it carefully. On the inside lip, the same chalky residue. The same chemical signature I recognized from symptoms alone. This wasn't her first time handling the substance. Someone confident enough to use a pill like this wasn't new to danger. That told me more about her state of mind than anything else. She was desperate. Desperation made people reckless. Recklessness made people easier to catch. I bagged the mug too. The detectives would need everything, and they'd need it properly preserved. I made sure not to disturb anything else as I made my way out, turning off the lights before stepping into the night. The walk to my car felt heavier this time, not with fear, but with purpose. Evidence didn't lie. People did. And someone was about to learn how dangerous truth could be when it belonged to the wrong man. When I drove back to the hospital, Claire was awake, sitting upright slowly. Her eyes softened when she saw me, but the fear behind them still lingered. "I'm okay," she whispered, "just tired." I sat beside her. "You're safe," I murmured, letting my fingers trace her knuckles again. "And I'm going to make sure this never happens again." She believed me. She always did. Maybe because she'd seen the man I used to be, before I buried that part of myself. But tonight reopened everything, and I didn't fight it. When the nurse came in to check her blood pressure, I stepped out again and headed straight for the detective on duty in the ER. He raised a brow when he saw the sealed bags in my hands. "Where'd you find these?" "Where she drank from," I answered quietly. "You'll want to run them." He hesitated, then nodded. "We'll get them to the lab tonight." Good. Time mattered. As I walked back to Claire, I already knew tomorrow wouldn't be about grief or fear. It would be about following the trail, a trail she never expected anyone would see, and I was going to follow it all the way to her front door. I stayed beside Claire until the first gray light of morning crept through the hospital blinds. She drifted in and out of sleep, her hand tightening around mine every time a monitor beeped or a nurse stepped in. When the doctor returned with stable vitals and a cautious nod, I finally allowed myself to breathe, not rest. Just breathe. Rest would come later, after I knew the person who did this couldn't get close to her again. When Claire fell asleep again, I kissed her forehead, whispered that I'd be back, and stepped out into the hallway. The detective on night duty was speaking with another officer, both of them examining the evidence bags I'd brought in. When he saw me, he just said, "We've already sent them to the lab. You weren't exaggerating. This is serious." Serious was an understatement. Someone had weaponized a drug designed to end pregnancies. Someone who lived in the same gated community. Someone with too much confidence and too little conscience. I left the hospital with a single purpose: find whoever was cracking under pressure. In crimes like this, guilt didn't hide. It leaked. The sun was barely up when I drove back to Ridgewood Bluffs. The guard at the gate nodded at me again, unaware that the place he protected had become a crime scene. I parked near the HOA office building and walked inside. I had a reason to be there. Maintenance techs were invisible. We blended into hallways and rooms like wallpaper. No one questioned why we were present. And today, I needed that invisibility. The hallway outside the HOA conference room was quiet. Too quiet. The door was cracked open, and inside I saw a man hunched over a stack of papers. Jonas Pruitt, HOA treasurer, nervous, skittish, and last night he couldn't look me in the eye. Today his hands were shaking. He didn't hear me at first. He was typing on his laptop, then stopping, rubbing his temples, typing again. His breath kept hitching, like someone drowning in thoughts they couldn't silence. When I stepped closer, my shoe tapped the floor lightly, and he jumped so violently the stapler on his desk fell over. "Sorry," I said softly. "Didn't mean to scare you." He blinked rapidly. "Oh, I didn't see you there." His voice cracked on the last word. Fear. Not of me, of something else. Something he knew. "I was checking the maintenance schedule," I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "Wanted to see if anyone called in a repair order for last night's event." He swallowed, hard. No, I don't think so." He wasn't lying, but he wasn't telling the truth either. He was avoiding something. I studied him quietly. He knew something, and he didn't know how to hold it. People like Jonas weren't built for guilt. They leaked it like a faulty pipe, gradually at first, then catastrophically. All I had to do was nudge. "You were at the social," I said. "You saw her refill Claire's drink." His eyes widened, and his fingers twitched toward the laptop. I don't know anything about that," he stammered. I wasn't paying attention." The lie was too practiced, too ready, too fast. I stepped into the room, keeping my posture relaxed. No threats, no tension, just quiet presence. "You're shaking," I said gently. He froze. "You weren't shaking yesterday," I continued. "Something changed." He exhaled shakily. I have anxiety." "You also erased a purchase record," I added quietly. He went pale. His laptop screen reflected a spreadsheet, HOA finances, transaction IDs, and several empty lines highlighted in yellow. Bingo. He closed the laptop so fast the sound echoed in the empty room. "I can't talk about this," he whispered. "You don't understand what she can do." "She tried to kill my child," I said softly, and his breath caught. That was the moment he cracked. He pressed both hands to his face and let out a choked sound halfway between a sob and a confession. "She said it was just a compliance adjustment," he whispered. "She said the investors needed clean records, and if I didn't help, she'd fine my mother's home for violations that didn't even exist." Blackmail, classic. "What did you delete, Jonas?" I asked, voice calm, almost gentle. He removed his hands from his face and looked at me with the expression of a man who'd been drowning for months and finally found someone to grab onto. "There was a purchase," he whispered, "2 days ago. Medication containers. She told me to clear it from the books before the inspection." "What medication?" He shook his head. "I don't know. I didn't want to know." But he did know. Somewhere deep inside, he'd been waiting for someone to force the truth out, to make him stop her. He reached for the laptop again, but this time slower, defeated. He opened the deleted transactions folder and clicked a restored entry. A receipt. Time-stamped. HOA credit card. Purchased discreetly. Storage containers used for pharmaceutical pills. I took a slow breath. "You need to show this to the detectives." He shook his head violently. "She'll destroy me. You don't know the things she can do." "She can't do more than she's already done," I said quietly. He met my eyes, and this time he didn't look away. He handed me the file. "She told me no one would ever notice," he whispered, "that you were too simple to understand anything." My jaw tightened. Simple. Right. When I walked out of that room, receipt in hand, I knew 2 things. Jonas had finally flipped. And Marla Hensley had just made her first real mistake. I stepped out of the HOA office with the restored receipt still warm in my hand, the morning sun glaring off the printed ink as if it wanted to highlight every damning detail. Jonas's shaky voice echoed behind me even after the door clicked shut. "She said no one would ever notice, that you were too simple to understand anything." Simple. That word stayed with me like a splinter under the skin. Small, painless, but impossible to ignore. It didn't anger me. It clarified things. Anyone who underestimated me had already lost the advantage. And Marla Hensley had built her entire sense of power on the belief that people like me didn't think, didn't watch, didn't understand. She was about to learn how wrong she was. I walked toward my car, pulled out my phone, and called the detective I'd spoken to at the hospital. He answered on the second ring. "Corbin?" "I have something," I said. "A receipt. Deleted from the HOA records, purchase of pharmaceutical storage containers. Timestamp matches 48 hours before the event." A pause. "You sure it's legit?" "Very, and there's more. We need a warrant." "Bring it in," he said. "Now?" I hung up and looked back toward the office windows. A shadow moved inside, Jonas, pacing, rubbing his forehead, staring at the door as if expecting someone far worse than me to walk through. He wasn't wrong to fear her. People like Marla thrived on intimidation, but fear worked both ways. If she sensed his guilt, she'd come for him next. I drove straight to the station, every turn sharpening my focus. When I arrived, the detective led me into a small, glass-walled interview room. He and a second officer examined the receipt, then photographed it from multiple angles, cataloging it as evidence. "You said these were deleted?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. Jonas restored it. She forced him to hide anything that might flag the community before the investor inspection. The detective exchanged a look with his partner. "This gives us cause," he murmured. "If she bought containers, there might be more in her office." They stepped outside to call a judge. Through the glass, I saw their posture change, straightening, tightening, as the pieces started aligning. They weren't treating this like a domestic dispute anymore. They were treating it like attempted murder. When they returned, the detective's expression told me everything. "Warrant approved. We're going in." A cold breath left me. Not relief, just readiness. One of the officers turned to me. "We'll handle this from here. You should head back to the hospital." "I'm coming," I said quietly. He hesitated. "It's not safe." "She tried to kill my child," I replied. "I'm not sitting in a waiting room while you confront her." They didn't argue again. We drove separately to Ridgewood Bluffs, arriving just minutes apart. The sun had climbed high now, casting sharp shadows across the clubhouse. Patrol cars rolled in silently. Residents peeked from windows, curious but unaware of what was unfolding. Detectives approached the HOA office door and knocked firmly. No answer. The warrant allowed them to enter. They pushed the door open. Inside, the office lights were off, but the blinds were half open, letting in streaks of harsh morning light. Dust floated in the beams. The place was neat. Too neat. A curated battlefield. They moved quickly, opening drawers, photographing everything, lifting small items with gloved hands. I stood at the doorway, memorizing every detail. The scent of perfume lingered faintly, floral and artificial, just like her smiles. Then the detective at the back of the room turned, holding an object between two fingertips, a flimsy blister pack, empty, torn at the edge. The brand name printed on the foil stopped my breath. Misoprostol, the exact drug found in Claire's blood. The detective placed it in an evidence bag immediately. "This alone is enough to charge her," he said, "but let's see if she left us anything else." They kept searching. Another officer called out, "Sir, you'll want to see this." He stood near a small cabinet behind the desk. Inside, lined in a row, were 3 ceramic mugs, all identical except for one, the floral print mug I'd found residue on last night. The officer bagged it on the spot. Then came the real surprise, a small notebook, tucked underneath a stack of irrelevant HOA forms. The detective opened it, his brows raised. Inside were handwritten notes, meetings, dates, reminders, and a line circled 3 times. Clear maternity risks before inspection, no exceptions. My jaw tightened. She didn't just plan this, she justified it. The detective snapped photos. "This shows intent," he muttered. She knew exactly what she was doing. But what struck me wasn't the words. It was the pattern of pressure applied through every detail. The receipts, the mug, the blister pack, the notebook. It all told the same story. She'd acted with confidence. Confidence meant she believed she was untouchable. Arrogance was always the enemy of caution. As they collected the final pieces of evidence, an officer asked, "Where is she this morning?" Jonas appeared at the doorway, pale and trembling. "She's hosting a board meeting in the community hall," he stammered. The detective nodded. "Good, then she won't see us coming." The officers moved out with purpose, evidence in hand, badges ready. I followed, steps steady. This was no longer about suspicion, no longer about fear, no longer about a collapsed wife in my arms. It was about truth, about exposure, about making sure a woman drunk on authority finally faced reality. And when we reached the community hall doors, ready to confront her, I felt no anger, only a cold, quiet clarity. She thought my wife was expendable. Now she was about to learn how evidence destroys entitlement. The community hall doors stood tall and glossy, the kind polished every week to impress the very investors she worried about. Inside, muffled voices rose and fell, a meeting already underway. The detectives flanked the entrance, one on each side. While I stood just behind them, my heart beat steady but cold. This was no confrontation born from rage. It was born from evidence, from truth. The lead detective pushed the door open. Inside, Marla Hensley stood at the front table, gesturing with an ease that made her look like a politician mid-speech. Her board members sat in stiff rows, some nodding, some pretending to listen. The moment the uniforms appeared, her smile froze mid-syllable. "Mrs. Hensley," the detective said, voice firm, "we need you to step away from the group." Silence swallowed the room. Every pair of eyes turned to her. Her face twitched, just once, before she forced a new smile. "Officers," she said lightly, "if this is about that little medical incident at the social, I've already explained." "This isn't a discussion," the detective interrupted. "We have a warrant and evidence. You need to come with us." The color drained from her face so fast it was almost satisfying. She glanced at me then, like she'd only now realized I was standing behind them. "You," she hissed, veneer cracking. "You're the one stirring chaos. That woman of yours fainted from stress and cheap snacks." The audacity didn't surprise me. People like her couldn't admit wrongdoing even if the proof wrapped itself around their wrists. The detective stepped closer. "We found misoprostol packaging in your office and residue on your personal mug. And we have a deleted receipt for the storage containers you purchased with HOA funds. Enough to obtain a warrant, enough to place you under arrest." Murmurs erupted, gasps, chairs scraped the floor. Marla's eyes widened, not with guilt, but with calculation. "This is absurd," she snapped. "Someone planted that. It's politically motivated. You're letting this man—" She jabbed a manicured finger at me. "Manipulate you." But the detective wasn't swayed. He reached for her wrists. She jerked back. "Don't touch me." "You're obstructing," he warned. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she demanded. "I know people, judges, senators, donors." The room erupted louder. Board members whispered frantically. Jonas stood near the back, trembling, pale, gripping the doorframe as if holding himself upright took effort. "That won't help you today," the detective said. He reached again, and this time she didn't pull back. She didn't obey either. She simply froze, as if refusing to move would somehow stop the law from applying to her. The handcuffs clicked. A single sound, sharp and final. Residents near the front gasped. Someone whispered, "Oh my God!" She snapped her head toward the crowd. "This is a mistake! He's lying!" Her voice went shrill, not panicked but offended, furious that her authority was slipping like sand through clenched fingers. Then her eyes locked onto Jonas, who shrank as though her gaze could bruise skin. "You," she spat. "You did this. You betrayed me." Jonas's voice was barely a whisper. "You made me." And for the first time since all of this began, she looked truly afraid. Detectives started walking her toward the exit. She twisted slightly, desperate to salvage dignity. "This community will regret letting him—" Another jab of her chin toward me. "Poison your trust." I simply exhaled, calm as stone. "I didn't poison anyone." "She'll walk," one resident muttered nervously. "She always gets away with things." "Not this time," another whispered. The hall buzzed with a trembling uncertainty, people deciding whether to stay loyal to their tyrant or step into the truth. Every HOA had moments like this, the tipping point, the line between fear and clarity. As they let her past me, she leaned in just enough to hiss, "I won't go down for this. I will not." I met her stare with silence, not anger, not triumph, just the quiet certainty of a man who knew where truth led. When the doors shut behind the group, Jonas exhaled so hard he trembled. I walked to him slowly. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded shakily. She's never been cornered before. I didn't think she could be." "You did the right thing," I said quietly. He swallowed. "They're going to need my testimony, aren't they?" "Yes. And she'll know." "She already knows," I replied. "But now she can't touch anyone." He sagged into a chair, as if the weight of months finally slipped off his shoulders. I stepped outside into the sunlight. The neighborhood lawns were perfectly trimmed, irrigation mist drifting through the morning air. It felt strange, something so peaceful existing beside something so ugly. An officer approached me. "We'll take her downtown for booking. The DA will file charges today." "Attempted fetal harm?" I asked. "And poisoning. Probably premeditated," he said. "With the evidence you brought, the judge won't hesitate." "Good." He gave me a long, respectful look. "Most people wouldn't have picked up that cup." Most people hadn't seen the consequences of missing small clues before. As I walked to my car, a knot inside me loosened. This was only the beginning. Evidence would keep unfolding, motives would be revealed, intent would be proven, but the biggest step had just been taken. She was no longer free. She was no longer powerful. She was no longer a threat. Subscribe if you believe justice should never bow to entitlement. Yet something in me remained cold, alert, waiting, not for fear, but for completion. Because an arrest wasn't the end. It was only the opening move in exposing everything she'd built her power on. And I was ready for the rest. The sun hung higher now, warming the edges of the sidewalk as I left the community hall behind. The echo of the cuffs around her wrists still lingered in my mind, not as satisfaction, but as confirmation that the first wall in her fortress had finally cracked. But an arrest, even with evidence, was not a conviction. Not in this world. Not with people like her who believed influence could bend outcomes. I knew better than to think this was over. Before going back to the hospital, I drove to the police station to check on the evidence chain. The detective met me in the lobby, a thick binder tucked under his arm. "The lab put your samples on rush priority," he said. "We should have a partial result by noon." "Partial is enough," I replied. He nodded. "Come with me." He led me to a small office where he placed the binder on a desk and opened it. Inside were photos of the blister pack, close-ups of the mug residue, and preliminary surface analyses. He pointed to a page marked in red. "We ran a presumptive test already. The residue chemically aligns with misoprostol. It'll be confirmed in the full toxicology report." It wasn't news to me. My gut had already reached that conclusion hours before, but seeing it in print added weight. Proof didn't care about denial. Proof didn't care about power. Where's she now? I asked. In booking. Her lawyer's on the way. She's refusing to speak without him. Of course she was. Silence was the only move left for someone used to controlling conversations. The detective flipped another page. The mug you found, same residue, identical chemical pattern on the inside rim. And the cup your wife drank from, traces match. I inhaled slowly. Good. We need to re-interview Jonas, he added. His testimony will matter if this goes to trial. It will go to trial, I said softly. He studied me for a moment. Most people fall apart after something like this. I've fallen apart before, I said. Not again. I left shortly after, heading back to the hospital. Claire was awake this time. When I walked into her room, her eyes soft but tired, she gave a small smile. You look like you haven't slept. I've had worse nights, I said, pulling a chair closer. How are you feeling? Sore, queasy, but better. She hesitated. Did they find anything? They arrested her, I said. They have enough to hold her while they build the case. She let out a slow breath, relief mixing with disbelief. I can't imagine why someone would do something like that. I brushed her hair gently with my fingers. You don't need to imagine it. You just need to heal. She reached for my hand. Please don't do anything reckless. I won't, I murmured. Everything I'm doing is through the system. And it was true. The old part of me, the one trained for fast, quiet justice, wasn't in control anymore. But I knew how to follow trails, how to align timelines, how to predict patterns. Evidence was a battlefield too, just quieter. When she fell asleep again, I stepped into the hallway. A doctor approached me, holding a chart. We received the first toxicology confirmation, he said. Your wife ingested a dose of misoprostol strong enough to induce labor. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice level. What does that mean for the baby? Right now, he said gently, the pregnancy is still viable, but we need to monitor closely. These next days matter. I nodded once, absorbing each word, each possibility. As he walked away, a familiar pressure closed around my chest. Not panic, but a memory. A battlefield tent. A medic shouting for assistance. A child's heartbeat fading on a monitor. A moment I hadn't saved. Not this time. I left the hospital again in the early afternoon. When I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed, an unknown number. I answered. A shaky voice came through. Jonas. Can we talk? He asked. Not at the HOA office, somewhere quiet. Where are you? The park across from the east gate. I'm on my way. When I arrived, he was sitting on a bench, knees bouncing, fingers tapping against each other. He looked smaller than he had that morning, like guilt had scraped layers off him. I sat beside him. You did the right thing. He shook his head. You don't understand. She knows things about people. Secrets, violations she invented, violations she forged. She thinks she's untouchable because she's always won. Not this time, I said. He swallowed hard. There's something else, something I didn't tell you. I waited. She didn't just buy containers. She requested sealed envelopes used for pharmaceutical samples. She kept them locked in her desk. Why? She was planning something bigger, he whispered. Something for the inspection auditors. If your wife hadn't... She had a list of households she wanted to address before the week ended. A chill slid through me. This wasn't just about us, I said. He nodded miserably. Your wife was the first, but she wouldn't have been the last. I stood slowly. The detective would need this. The DA would need this. Motive wasn't just strong, it was expansive, reckless, dangerous. Jonas looked up at me. She's going to try to spin it. She's going to say it was all planted. She can say whatever she wants, I replied. The evidence says more. He let out a shaking breath. I'm scared. You should be, I said gently. But you're safer now than you've ever been. He nodded, and for the first time, he didn't look away. As I walked back to my car, the weight of everything shifted inside me. This wasn't just a crime of opportunity. It was a planned pattern, and patterns left trails. Her arrogance had created the first cracks. Now, her intent would bury her. The weight of Jonas's confession stayed with me long after I left the park. A list of households, pharmaceutical envelopes, plans that stretched beyond what she'd done to Claire. This was no momentary lapse or emotional outburst. This was premeditated control, a pattern carved into weeks of planning. And if Jonas was right, she hadn't just targeted us. She had been preparing to fix the community one household at a time, using chemical force where intimidation wasn't enough. I drove straight to the detective station again, rehearsing how I'd explain Jonas's new information without overwhelming the investigators. When I walked inside, the same detective from earlier looked up from his desk, expression tight with focus. "You again," he said. "That was fast." "There's more," I replied. He motioned to the back office and we sat. I shared every detail Jonas had given me, the list, the envelopes, her larger plans, the fact that Claire might have only been the first. The detective's posture sharpened and he grabbed his notebook. "That's motive on a larger scale," he muttered. "Premeditation, dangerous behavior pattern. This helps the DA build intent." "She wasn't going to stop," I added. "She thought she was fixing the community." "Fixing," he echoed with a dark look. "She won't be touching anything for a long time." He stood abruptly. "We need to interview Jonas formally, today." "I'll bring him in," I said. "You sure he'll come?" "He will," I replied. "He's terrified, but he knows this is his only chance to be free of her." The detective hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but tread lightly. People like him sometimes scare themselves into silence." I left the station and called Jonas immediately. He didn't answer the first time, or the second. By the third, he picked up with a fractured breath. Hello? "They need your statement," I said. "Today. Officially." Silence. "Jonas, you said she kept a list, that she had more planned. If you don't speak, she'll spin everything. She'll blame you. She'll get out, and you know it." Another shaky breath. Then, "Where do you want me to go?" "I'll meet you at the community entrance, 10 minutes. When I arrived, he was already pacing near the gate, arms wrapped around himself like a shield. His eyes darted nervously toward passing cars, as if expecting her to appear, even though she was in custody. "You're safe," I said. "She can't come near you." He swallowed. "Let's just go." The drive to the station was quiet. Jonas kept twisting his fingers, sometimes whispering to himself as if practicing courage. When we parked, he froze again. "She'll ruin me," he whispered, "even from jail." "She can't," I said calmly. "Not this time." Inside, the detective met us and led Jonas away for a recorded statement. I waited in the lobby, listening to faint voices through the closed door. After nearly 40 minutes, the detective stepped back out. "He told us everything," he said, "enough for the DA to add multiple charges. He even handed over an email where she mentioned mandatory corrections." "Good," I replied quietly. "He's still scared of her," the detective added, "but he's finally talking. That helps us, and you." I nodded, feeling something shift. The power she'd held over that community was unraveling thread by thread. Intimidation couldn't survive truth, and truth, when spoken out loud, had a way of echoing into places she couldn't control. When Jonas exited the interview room, he looked like someone drained of every emotion he'd been holding for years. But there was something else in his eyes, something almost like relief. "It's done," he whispered. "You did the right thing," I told him. "I don't feel brave," he murmured. "Brave isn't loud," I said. "Sometimes it's just refusing to keep quiet." He nodded, shaky but resolute, and walked out of the station with a posture just a little bit straighter than when he'd entered. The detective turned to me. "We're taking this straight to the DA. With everything gathered so far, the case is solid. Her lawyer's already throwing a fit in booking." "She's still there?" "For now," he replied. "But she'll be transferred soon." I checked my watch. Claire would be waking up again soon. I needed to get back to her, especially with the toxicology results coming in. When I arrived at the hospital, she was sitting upright, propped on pillows, hands resting protectively on her stomach. Her eyes softened when she saw me. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly. I sat beside her. "Better than earlier. They found more evidence, and her pattern of behavior. This will hold." Claire exhaled, long and relieved. "I still don't understand why anyone would do this." "She thought she was untouchable," I said. "She thought no one would ever look closely." Claire reached for my hand, squeezing. "You looked." "There was no choice," I murmured. "Not after what happened." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She'd cried enough in life already. When she leaned her head on my shoulder, the machines around us beeped steadily, each one reminding me what was at stake. Our baby was still holding on. She was still holding on. And so was I. A nurse entered and handed me a sheet. "Here are the toxicology confirmations," she said softly. "The levels match the evidence police sent to the lab." I scanned the document. Each line was another nail in her coffin, another step in dismantling her false image, another weight added to the truth. Claire touched my wrist gently. "You'll see this through, won't you?" "Yes," I whispered, "until the very end." Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a process. And we were far from done. The toxicology sheet in my hands felt heavier than paper should. Each printed number, each matching chemical signature, each confirmed trace tightened the narrative that had been building since the moment Claire collapsed in my arms. This wasn't just evidence. It was the spine of the case forming in real time. Claire leaned against me, her breathing steady but fatigued, and I knew she needed peace. But peace wouldn't come until this was finished. I folded the sheet carefully and slipped it into my jacket. "I need to take this to the detectives," I said softly. Claire nodded, tired but resolute. "Go. I'm not going anywhere." "I'll be back before dinner," I promised, brushing my thumb along her cheek. There was comfort in her eyes, but fear still lingered beneath it. Fear of what almost happened, fear of what could still happen if justice slipped. I wouldn't let it. I left the hospital room, letting the door click quietly behind me. The hallway hummed with low conversations, occasional beeping, and the sterile scent of disinfectant. But beneath all of it, my thoughts were razor-focused. The evidence, the confession, the mug, the residue, the list, everything was aligning. All it needed now was to be placed in the right hands. When I reached the station again, the detective spotted me instantly. "Corbin," he called from across the room, waving me into the office. "You got something?" I handed him the toxicology sheet. His eyes scanned it quickly, jaw tightening with every line. "This matches the mug and cup. Residue perfectly," he said. "This is big." "It proves everything," I said quietly. "It does," he agreed. "And the DA already filed the initial charges, but with this, the case gets stronger." He tucked the sheet into the case file and flipped it closed. "We're scheduling a preliminary court appearance for tomorrow morning. You'll need to be there." "I will," I said. He hesitated, then added, "Be prepared. Her attorney is aggressive. He'll try to paint you as unstable, emotional, maybe even vengeful." "He can try," I replied. "Truth doesn't need theatrics." The detective gave a faint smirk. "You'd make a decent investigator." "I'm done with that life," I murmured. But I wasn't. Not really, not when my family's safety depended on using everything I knew. I left the station and drove back toward Ridgewood Bluffs, needing to see the place one more time before court. I parked near the playground where kids were already running around, unaware of the storm their community was caught in. A few parents whispered when they saw me. Some approached cautiously. One woman hesitated before speaking. "Is it true she was arrested?" "Yes," I said simply. "She always scared me," the woman whispered. "Always watching, always threatening fines for nothing." "She can't hurt anyone now," I assured her. Another parent chimed in. "We're sorry about your wife. We didn't know." I nodded. Their fear wasn't malicious, just conditioned. That was the thing about power misused. It made good people quiet. After a few minutes, I moved on, heading toward the clubhouse. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The air was still stale from yesterday's search. Chairs were scattered, some overturned when officers had moved fast. The table where the drinks were served remained in the same corner, untouched since last night. I walked toward it, remembering the moment Claire smiled and accepted the cup, remembering the sound she made when pain hit her, remembering how fast everything changed. I placed my hand lightly on the counter. "Never again," I whispered. As I stepped back, the door behind me opened and Jonas slipped inside. He looked around nervously before spotting me. "Detectives came to get me earlier," he said, "for a statement about the notebook." "The one with the circled line?" I asked. He nodded. "They wanted to know if she ever mentioned corrections before. I told them everything." "You did the right thing." He swallowed. "There's something else. Something I forgot to show them." From his jacket, he pulled out a small USB drive. "She used this for board meeting minutes," he whispered, "but she also kept private notes on it. Schedules, plans, draft messages." "You looked at it?" Only after, his voice trembled, after what happened to your wife. I took the drive, feeling the weight of yet another piece of truth. This could seal the rest of the case. She terrified us, he whispered, but she terrified herself too. She thought she had to control everything. And you're free of her now, I said. I hope so. He left quickly, still shaking. I slipped the USB into my pocket. This had to go straight to the detective, but I wasn't leaving just yet. I walked through the service corridor, an area only maintenance staff ever used. Dim lights flickered overhead. It smelled faintly of cleaning agents and old wood. This was where I belonged, in the shadows, quiet, overlooked. The very place she never imagined truth could come from. Before leaving, I stepped onto the clubhouse porch and looked across the neighborhood. Calm, orderly, pristine, a facade polished by intimidation. But cracks were spreading now, visible in the way residents whispered, the way they watched the boardroom door like it was a haunted room. Good. Power built on fear deserved to crumble. I walked back to my car and pulled out my phone. As I drove toward the station again with the USB in my pocket, I tapped the screen and said aloud, "Subscribe if you're watching this unfold and believe justice should always have a voice." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt something settle inside me. This wasn't just about justice, it was about truth finally stepping out of the shadows. And tomorrow, in that courtroom, the shadows would be gone. The drive back to the station felt like moving through the final stretch of a tunnel, long, dim, and narrowing toward the inevitable light ahead. The USB drive sat in my pocket like a live wire. The evidence on it, whatever it held, would either reinforce everything we'd built or reveal something even darker about the lengths she went to maintain control. I found parking, stepped out, and headed straight inside. The detective noticed me immediately. "You're back faster than expected," he said. "I have something you need to see." I handed him the drive. He didn't waste time. Within minutes, we were in a small office with a laptop connected to the chain of custody logging system. He inserted the drive, and folders populated the screen. At first glance, they were innocuous: meeting notes, attendance lists, HOA reminders. But then he clicked a folder labeled Internal Oversight. Inside were spreadsheets, names, dates, comments. Some marked with yellow, others with red. Several columns repeated the same phrase: non-compliant household, requires intervention. And next to 3 names, including ours, was a date coinciding with the weekend of the social. My chest tightened. She planned the timing. "Looks like it," the detective said grimly. He scrolled further. Another section contained drafted emails to board members, never sent. Messages outlining talking points, press responses, even potential accusations she could use to discredit anyone who questioned her. One draft included my name and a note, saying, "Frame instability, investigate background quietly." She was preparing to create a narrative before anything even happened, the detective muttered. "That'll play well in front of a judge." "Good," I said quietly. He clicked one last file, a document titled Risk Mitigation. Inside were notes that made his jaw clench. "These are instructions," he said, "for dealing with residents she deemed problematic, including chemical corrections under the guise of health checkups or community safety reminders." She didn't name substances, but the intent is clear. My hands curled into fists against the table. The cold weight of understanding settled over me. "This wasn't personal," I murmured. "We weren't special targets. We were just first." "Which makes her more dangerous," he said, "and makes our case ironclad." He stood abruptly, gathering the printouts. "This is going to the DA immediately. You should head home, get some rest. Tomorrow, the courtroom will be full. I'll be ready." When I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun had shifted toward amber, casting long shadows across the station steps. Everything looked deceptively still, quiet, as if the world hadn't tilted off its axis. But I knew the quiet never lasted long before truth disrupted it. I drove back to the hospital. Claire was awake when I entered, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked stronger than earlier, though fatigue still clung to her features. "How did it go?" she asked. I sat at the edge of the bed. "We found more, enough to show she intended this, enough to prove it wasn't a mistake or a moment of anger." Claire lowered her gaze. "I keep wondering why she hated us so much." "She didn't hate us," I said gently. She saw us as pieces to move off her board. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. I don't understand how someone can think like that. I didn't either, but experience had taught me that cruelty didn't always come wrapped in violence. Sometimes it was packaged in paperwork, fake smiles, and HOA titles. We have court tomorrow morning, I said. The preliminary hearing. She nodded slowly. Do you have to speak? Not yet. They'll mostly outline the charges. And you'll be okay? I will, I said. How are you feeling? Tired, scared, but safe with you here. Her words landed deep, somewhere old and aching, somewhere I'd tried to seal shut after losing our first child. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead lightly to hers. I won't let anything happen to you or the baby, not ever. She closed her eyes. I believe you. When she drifted off to sleep again, I stepped quietly into the hallway. A nurse was charting vitals at the desk. She glanced up and nodded sympathetically. Tomorrow will be hard, she said gently. But necessary, I replied. Yes, she said, softly. Necessary. I walked to the end of the hallway and leaned against the window, watching city lights flicker to life. Cars moved below like small, determined currents in a river. Life went on, but tomorrow everything would shift again, this time in a courtroom, under the weight of truth and law. I replayed the evidence in my mind, piece by piece, the way I used to analyze intel in dim tents overseas. Everything had a pattern. Every pattern had a breaking point. And she, despite her arrogance, her planning, her threats, had reached hers. As I stood there, my phone vibrated with a text from the detective. DA reviewed everything. Charges upgraded. See you in the morning. I exhaled slowly. Tomorrow, the courtroom wouldn't just hear what she'd done. They'd see the truth she tried to bury. They'd see the evidence she thought would never be found. And they'd see the quiet man she underestimated stand where she least expected, ready to witness the fall of the person who almost destroyed his family. Morning arrived faster than I expected. I'd barely slept, maybe an hour, maybe less. But my mind was sharper than it had been in days. Court days always sharpened me. They demanded precision, and today demanded everything I had. I arrived at the courthouse early, the chill of dawn still lingering in the air, the heavy stone building looming with an authority I welcomed. When I stepped inside, the detective met me at the security checkpoint. You ready? He asked. As ready as I need to be. We're in courtroom 3. DA wants you seated up front. We walked down the hallway, passing lawyers adjusting ties, clerks carrying folders, families whispering anxiously. Courthouses had their own energy, a mixture of fear, truth, and consequence. Today, all 3 belonged to her. Inside the courtroom, several residents from Ridgewood Bluffs already filled the seats, whispering among themselves. Some glanced at me with guilt, some with curiosity, some with quiet respect. Jonas sat near the back, shoulders hunched, eyes darting everywhere but the door. When he saw me, he nodded once, small but brave. Then the bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. All rise. Judge Renford Vale entered, stern, measured, eyes taking in the room as though he already sensed the storm underneath. When everyone sat again, the DA stood. Your Honor, we are prepared to proceed with a preliminary hearing regarding the charges against the defendant, Marla Hensley. The doors opened. She walked in escorted by deputies, wrists cuffed, chin raised in defiance. Her lawyer, a polished man with a theatrical stride, followed closely behind, whispering aggressively in her ear. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly at me. Her eyes were venom. I held her stare calmly. She looked away first. When she sat at the defense table, her lawyer immediately objected to almost everything: procedure, timing, evidence handling. But the sub-judge wasn't buying the performance. Counsel, he said sternly, this is a hearing, not a circus. If your client wants to be heard, she will be, but we will follow the law. The DA approached the podium. Your Honor, the state will present initial evidence establishing probable cause for the following charges: attempted fetal harm, poisoning, possession of a controlled substance with intent to administer, and premeditated bodily injury. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom. Her lawyer shot back. The defense maintains that the alleged evidence is circumstantial and unreliable. My client has no history of violence. The DA interrupted. We will let the evidence speak. Proceed, the judge said. The DA began with the toxicology report from the hospital. The doctor who treated Claire testified first via video. He described the chemical found in her bloodstream, the dosage level, the risk it posed. Marla's lawyer objected repeatedly, overruled each time. Then came the forensic specialist, who matched the residue from the mug and Claire's cup. They showed photos, the identical chemical patterns, the time stamps, the chain of custody. Her lawyer tried again to interrupt, but even the judge seemed irritated now. "This is foundational evidence," Judge Vale said. "It stands." Then the DA called Jonas. He trembled as he walked to the stand. He avoided her eyes entirely. When he spoke, his voice cracked, once, then steadied. He told the courtroom everything, the deleted receipts, the pressured approvals, the corrections list, the emails, the blackmail. At one point, the defense lawyer shouted, "Objection! He's inventing motives." Jonas's voice grew stronger. "I'm not inventing anything. I was terrified. She controlled all of us." The judge leaned forward. Let the witness continue. Jonas took a shaky breath and said the words that made the entire courtroom lean in. "She told me the community needed fixing, that some residents were problems that had to be handled quietly." A tense silence filled the room. Even her lawyer stopped mid-scribble. Then the DA presented the USB drive findings, the spreadsheets, the names, the dates, the drafts of statements she planned to use to blame others. Some jurors in the gallery covered their mouths. Others stared at her in disbelief. Her mask cracked. For the first time, she looked rattled, but the DA wasn't finished. "Your Honor, the state calls one final supporting witness, Mr. Corbin." I stood. My heartbeat didn't spike. My breath didn't shake. Years of training wrapped around me like armor. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and took my seat. The DA approached. "State your background." "I'm a maintenance technician at Ridgewood Bluffs," I began. "And before that?" "Military medical intelligence analysis," I said. A murmur swept the gallery. The DA nodded. "Explain how that experience helped you identify the nature of the incident on the night of the social." I described it cleanly: symptoms, patterns, behavioral observations, recognition of tampering signs. Every detail flowed with calm precision. No embellishment, no theatrics, just truth. Her lawyer tried to catch me in contradictions, failed every time. I spoke about the scent on the rim of the cup, the way she avoided looking at it afterward, the residue I recognized, the steps I took to preserve evidence. The courtroom listened as though the air itself had stilled. When I finished, the DA said, "No further questions." Her lawyer approached, sneering. "You're not a chemist, you're a maintenance worker. Why should we trust anything you say?" "Because it aligns with every piece of evidence your client didn't expect anyone to find," I replied. Even the judge seemed to pause. When testimony ended, the DA summarized the evidence. Her lawyer offered thin excuses, none convincing. Judge Vale looked over everything silently. Then he spoke. "The court finds probable cause. All charges stand. The defendant will remain in custody until trial." Her gasp was sharp, furious, disbelieving. Mine was silent. Because this was the moment the scales began tipping. Public exposure taking center stage, her power cracking beneath the weight of truth. The first real victory. Court adjourned with a mixture of shock and stunned murmurs rippling through the gallery. But her reaction, wide-eyed disbelief twisted with rage, stayed with me as the deputies guided her back through the side door. She had expected to walk out today. She had expected influence to work the way it always did. Instead, the judge's ruling pinned her exactly where she feared most. Under the full weight of the justice system she'd weaponized against everyone else. As the courtroom emptied, Jonas approached me slowly, like someone stepping across ice that might crack beneath him. "It's really happening," he whispered, voice shaking. "It is," I said, "and it's going to keep happening." He swallowed, nodding, though fear lingered in his eyes. "I still can't believe I said all that out loud." "You did what had to be done." He gave a stiff, grateful nod and stepped aside when Claire appeared at the courtroom doors, a nurse accompanying her for safety. She walked carefully, but her presence, despite the fatigue in her eyes, brought a steadiness back into me. I crossed the room quickly and wrapped a supportive arm around her. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. "Tired," she whispered. "But watching him listen to you, watching him accept every piece of evidence, it finally feels like something real is happening." It was, and yet, as much as the hearing felt like a victory, I knew what came next. The long stretch between preliminary hearing and trial, a place where defense lawyers dug, where intimidation attempts surfaced, where pressure could shift. The narrative, if people weren't careful. I kept one hand around Claire as we walked out of the courthouse and into the late morning air. The sun felt sharper today, the sky clearer. But my instincts didn't relax. They shifted, tightened, prepared for the next phase. We drove home together, the nurse following in her own car until she was confident Claire was stable. Once inside, Claire settled gently onto the couch, adjusting pillows behind her back. I sat beside her, slipping off my jacket. "You should rest," I murmured. She shook her head. "I want to hear everything." So I told her, the USB, the spreadsheets, the judge's words, how her lawyer tried to paint me as unstable. Claire listened quietly, absorbing each detail like someone relearning the terrain of her own life. "She hated us that much?" she whispered. "She didn't hate us," I said. "She saw us as obstacles." Claire touched her stomach protectively. "Obstacles don't breathe, don't carry children." "I know," I said, voice low, "but people like her don't think in human terms." Hours passed quietly. Claire slept for part of the afternoon, while I sat near the window, studying the neighborhood outside. Residents moved differently today, glancing over shoulders, speaking in hushed tones, checking phones constantly. News had spread faster than wildfire. Then, around 4 p.m., a knock sounded at the door. I stood immediately and opened it to find Jonas again, ashen, sweating, eyes flicking everywhere but my face. She called me," he stammered. My pulse dropped into a cold, steady beat. "From custody?" He nodded. "Her lawyer got her a monitored call. She wanted to speak to me. She said I ruined everything, that I'd regret lying about her." "She threatened you," I said. He nodded again, voice breaking. "Yes." I stepped aside. "Come in." He didn't move. I don't want to bring trouble to your house." "You're not," I said firmly. "You're bringing truth." Slowly, trembling, he entered. I guided him to the dining table and sat across from him. Claire woke at the sound of voices, peeking from the living room with concern, but trusting I had it handled. I kept my voice calm. "What did she say?" "She told me she'd fix me when she gets out," he whispered, "that people will see me as a traitor." "She's trying to scare you," I said, "because fear is the only weapon she has left." "She said she'll get out," Jonas whispered. "She said judges listen to people like her, not like us." Claire's soft voice floated from the living room. "Judges listen to evidence, and you gave them plenty." Jonas looked between us, breathing unevenly. What if she somehow turns people against me?" "She won't," I said, "because the truth already broke her circle of influence." He lowered his head into his hands. "I keep replaying everything I let happen, everything I signed, everything she told me to hide." "You're not responsible for her choices," I said quietly, "but you are responsible for helping stop her. And you did." He looked up slowly, eyes red. Do you think they'll call me to testify again?" "Yes," I said honestly. "At the trial?" He swallowed. "I'll do it. I'm scared, but I'll do it." I nodded. "That's courage, Jonas, not fearlessness, choosing to do what's right anyway." A soft knock interrupted our conversation. The detective entered holding papers. "Sorry to intrude," he said. "I was coming to update you anyway." He handed me a file. The DA added another charge, attempted aggravated assault. The judge agreed she remains a flight risk. "Good," I murmured. He turned to Jonas. "And we saw the call log. Her message to you didn't violate any laws, but it helps us. Shows intimidation, shows motive." Jonas sagged with relief. The detective left after a few more minutes, leaving us in a quietly strengthening resolve. Claire spoke softly from the couch. "This is almost over. We just have to get through the trial." I sat beside her again, taking her hand. "Yes, and when the time comes, I'll testify again, and I'll make sure every piece of truth is laid out." "Do you think the judge will see through her?" she asked. He already has, I said. Tomorrow, the case moves forward, and she's running out of places to hide. The sun dipped outside, casting long shadows across the room, but none of them felt threatening anymore, because the truth wasn't in the shadows. It was standing in the open now, and it was unstoppable. Night settled over Ridgewood Bluffs, but sleep didn't come easily. Not for Claire, who drifted in and out between discomfort and exhaustion. Not for Jonas, who texted me late saying he kept hearing her voice repeating threats in his head. And not for me. Not with the trial only days away, and the last pieces of the case tightening into place. But morning brought something unexpected, a phone call from the district attorney. "Corbin," he said the moment I answered. "We need you and Claire in court today." "Early?" "Today?" I asked, already pulling on my jacket. "Why?" "She's taking a plea, and the judge wants the victims present when he issues sentencing recommendations." A long, controlled breath left my chest. Claire stirred on the couch, worry flickering in her eyes. "What is it?" "It's happening," I said. "Today." We got ready in silence, both of us moving with a strange mixture of dread and relief. By the time we stepped outside, the sky was a clear winter blue, cold, crisp, unforgiving. Claire held my arm as we walked to the car, steady but fragile. Her strength had carried us this far, but today would take something deeper from her. The courthouse parking lot was already filling. Reporters lingered near the entrance, whispering into their mics. Neighbors from the community gathered in clusters, wide-eyed and murmuring. Jonas stood alone near the steps until he saw us. He hurried over. "She's really pleading guilty?" he asked in disbelief. "Her lawyer must have told her the evidence was too strong," I replied. "This is her last chance at mercy." He swallowed, fear mixing with something else. Relief, maybe. "I hope she doesn't look at me." "She won't matter after today," Claire said softly. We walked inside together. The courtroom was fuller than during the preliminary hearing. People who once feared her now wanted to witness the end. The bailiff called for silence, and the judge entered. A moment later, deputies led her in. No defiance this time, no raised chin. Just a pale, hollow woman whose entire facade had collapsed beneath the weight of evidence and public exposure. Her lawyer whispered furiously, but she barely reacted. When the judge asked if she understood the charges she was pleading to, her voice cracked. "Yes, Your Honor." The DA presented the final summary of the case. He spoke about Claire's poisoning, the unborn child's risk, the premeditation indicated by her lists and USB files, the targeting of other residents, the manipulation, the intimidation, the psychological control she wielded. With each word, her shoulders curled inward as though the truth itself pressed down on her. When it was time for victim statements, Claire squeezed my hand. "You go first," she whispered. I nodded and stepped forward. The courtroom waited as I stood before the judge. "I'm not here because she hurt us," I began quietly. "I'm here because she planned to, because she looked at a pregnant woman and saw an inconvenience, and because when she put that chemical in my wife's drink, she didn't just attack a family. She attacked the safety of an entire community she was supposed to protect." People shifted uncomfortably. Some wiped tears. Even her lawyer looked away. I continued, my voice steady. "My background taught me how to read people, and what I saw in her wasn't frustration or anger. It was control, cold, calculated control. We were just the first targets on her list. If this hadn't stopped now, others would have followed." I finished simply, "We're asking for protection and for accountability." When I returned to my seat, Claire rose next. She wasn't loud, she didn't shake. Her voice was soft, so soft the courtroom hushed just to hear her. "You almost took my baby," she whispered, looking directly at the judge. "And I don't think I'll ever forget the fear I felt when I collapsed. But I'm here today. My child is still here. Because someone cared enough to look past appearances and see what was happening." She sat again, eyes shining but dry. Stronger than she knew. Jonas was last. His statement was brief, trembling, and raw. "I thought she owned me," he said. "But she didn't. Not anymore." The courtroom went silent. Judge Vale reviewed the plea terms one final time, then spoke with a firmness that resonated across every seat. "Given the evidence, the danger posed to residents, the premeditated nature of the actions, and the impact on the victims, the court agrees to the plea. The defendant will serve 15 years in state prison." A collective exhale swept across the room. 15 years. Not probation, not community service. Real prison. She didn't turn to look at us when the deputies led her away. Her world had collapsed completely. The courtroom doors closed behind her, and with that sound, something inside me released. A tension I'd held so long, it felt like a second spine. Claire leaned against me, shaking just slightly. Jonas let out a sob he'd been holding for years. Outside the courthouse, sunlight broke fully over the steps, warm despite the cold. Reporters shouted questions, but I ignored them. Today wasn't for headlines, it was for closure. As we reached the car, Claire slipped her hand into mine. "It's finally over," she whispered. "Yeah," I murmured. "It is." But as I helped her into the car, I glanced back at the courthouse, at the place where truth had finally outrun fear. And I knew this wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about protection, about exposing darkness, about the quiet strength of people who refuse to look away. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Karen swapped my baby's DNA test to prove it wasn't mine. The lab. Tech noticed the tampering and called the cops. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?